Yo, last time we made this awesome eel skeleton as an entrance to the city. But right now, let's turn our gaze to the sea. This time, it's lighthouse time. I'm so excited, it's going to be awesome. So I was considering those two locations for the lighthouse, but I feel like none of them will do. I need them to be somewhat close to the pontoon and the general harbor, which will sit someplace from here. But this feels way too close to the skeletons because this building will be like, I don't know, like a dozen block wide maybe in total. And that's like way too close, the scale doesn't work. A bit more in the distance could do if it was a bit taller, but I'm not too convinced of just having it sit on the cliff there, so I had an idea. Well, more like the only other possibility. But I will need an island. Which means it's time to scour the internet for epic references of lighthouse on islands. I found 5 really inspiring images. At this stage, I know that I want the lighthouse to sit on a sheer and epic cliff, and that I want some kind of building attached to it. For this city, I generally want to challenge myself in integrating different terrain elevations, so we can also throw it in the mix. The first actual step was to figure out exactly where I was going to put all of that, and how it connected to the island. I tried a bunch of different things and ended up settling on a spot 30 or so block away from the main cliff. As with the skeleton, I always start by blocking out the general shape of the build, a bit like a scaffolding or general layout. It's really important in order to get a good impression of the scale and proportions of the build. You can also see me try different shapes, as I did not know if I wanted it to be round, squarish, pointy, or bulky. So I went through a lot of iterations, and I'm really glad I took the time to do it at this stage, as it saved me a lot of trouble and headache down the line. It's also important to note that I'm starting with the lighthouse, as it will be the focal point. Being really inspired by this other Minecraft lighthouse I collected in my references, I tried to fit a few houses around it, but it just wasn't really working. My saving grace was to think about how the path would connect the different spaces, and figuring that out allowed me to place the rest really effortlessly. For the terrain, I had this vision of a tall and sheer cliff toward the high sea and a more gentle slope inward. When I planned for rocks, I placed the main lines of the shapes, which allow me to get a good general look without committing too much to terraforming details, which I take care of while filling the blank spots. And since I'm happy with the composition, I pick a general rocky color palette and start filling the spaces. I really like the ingredients as it allows to draw the eye upward with the lighter color, but it also emphasizes the position of the light. What's in the sunlight is brighter, what's in the shadow is darker. It gives the build a more cohesive and painterly feeling, like everything is well put together. Speaking of painterly, I really love mixing terracotta in my rocks, as it gives this extra pop of color. Just using it as an accent is enough to remind our brains that rocks are not completely grey, but also slightly brown with all of the dirt accumulated over the time. I also love to use purple to emphasize the shadows. It gives this nice vibrant look to the color palette. It just follows the general theory of light in illustration. Light is warm, therefore yellow, while shadows are cool, so we paint them blue. It really helps to define and highlight the different volumes and give a better read of the shapes. And for that, I'm also layering colors, as you can see. The rock lines sticking out are light grey using andesite, stone, and diorite, while the ones more inward are a few tone darkers using deep slate and purple terracotta. This emphasizes the volume by creating contrast, which makes it look deeper than it really is. I'm also doing my best to pay attention to the geological formation, putting more prone inwards, the strong winds of the sea having more chance to blow any dirt out. It's also why the cliffs are more eroded, therefore sharper towards the high sea, while the side towards the main island is more gentle, being protected from the elements. Which I'm also emphasizing by putting more smaller spikes sticking out of the water on this side, as they will probably just be blown away on the other one, which requires bigger and stronger spikes. To bring more life on this barren rock, I need to add some vegetation, which I create using green glazed terracotta for the highlight, moss for the general natural look, and green terracotta for the darker, more shadowy area. I'm also experimenting with mossy cobblestone and lichen as a mean to transition between the grey and the green in a really smooth gradient. I also use other type of glazed terracotta for the extra pop of colors and detail, reminding me of random shells and organisms colonizing the rocks. To really give that extra sharp look to the cliff, I need to break up the really square edges using walls, slabs, and stairs. The extra details really bring a lot of cohesion to the overall shape. I focus mainly on the top of the spikes, which benefits a lot from looking pointier, and the base where I smooth out the angles, taking advantage of the walls of smaller sizes. This makes the bottom part softer and rounder, which in turn, by contrast, emphasizes the spikes even more. The vegetation is doing great, bringing more life to the rocks, but I need a few more interesting focal points, so this is the perfect opportunity to add a few small trees to the high seaside. I keep them small, like shrubs. A big tree will make the island look tiny, and that is really not the goal. We want it to be impressive and dramatic. They are also very helpful to break up the shapes of the rocks a bit. As I play with different elevations, I use them to lead the eye towards the bridge and base of the lighthouse. At this point, I'm starting to be really satisfied with the overall look of the island. The vegetation is doing wonders to highlight the edges while bringing more life and personality to it. I really nailed the shape I wanted, with these more dramatic cliffs on the ocean side, protecting the inhabitants from terrors of the deep, while being gentler on the inner side, embracing and supporting the lighthouse and highlighting the entrance in a welcoming fashion. Once this was done, it was time to tackle the man-made elements, starting with the pass and the bridge. I kept the previously established blood red color palette, as this will facilitate the transition of the main island while adding some more points of interest, which also really helps separating the lighthouse from the rocks, which gives a way better read to the picture. These new mangrove planks really contrast well with blues and greens, and I am so happy they got introduced. As I was making my way around the lighthouse, it gave me some time to think about what I wanted for the bridge. I wanted to have a dangling bridge slightly at an angle, like it was blown by the wind. Since this game is pretty static, any form of movement really helps to bring life in the build. But angle cables are notoriously hard to make, especially at a small scale, so I had to plan accordingly for them to be straight even if the bridge was not. You can see that part of that plan was to use these huge dangling logs as a counterbalance, anchoring the bridge entrances so my cables would have a place to rest, while keeping it reasonably physically coherent. It was also really tricky to create a railing, so I had to use a mix of signs and trapdoors to kinda create a curved line, while trying my best to not have any obvious gaps, like I would have had if it was only made of hanging signs. Having a straight railing in some places is enough to trick our brain into thinking it's everywhere if we put enough noise and gibberish in between to drown its absence. Detail-wise, I chose chaos, placing bits and bobs everywhere to make it look like the bridge had to have a few rippers after being damaged by the elements. This gave it a more fragile look, contrasting nicely with the sturdiness of the rock and the lighthouse. For the building itself, it was very important to choose a color palette wisely, since it's the first man-made building, chances are that this color scheme will follow me for quite some time. But I didn't feel like making important decisions today, so I chose a neutral brown color scheme, in part because it's one of the most well-furnished tones in the game and the easiest to make gradients with, and in part because a more muted tone will allow me to add any pop of color I want later down the road and still look good in any circumstance. To make the base look more sturdy, I brought in some of these tundrakes in the mix, keeping it the general lighting scheme I defined for the island so the two will blend together in tone and color, but contrast in shape. Between really square man-made and really spiky and natural, distinction is still striking, which still helps distinguish the two elements. I like building at a human scale, which I find really cute and comfy. However, it means that my lighthouse is only a few blocks wide, which doesn't leave a lot of room for crazy details. My strategy in general is to have a nice, readable, recognizable, and interesting general shape that I then supplement with great usage of color. Detail-wise, I like to pretend that they are there, adding a few supports, dangling bits and pieces, but nothing too crazy. Over-detailing it, especially at a small scale like that, would only add noise, which will diminish the impact of the general shape. As I mentioned before, the neutral wood tones allow me to experiment with roof colors. I chose a bright orange as it was close enough to the brown of the wood and red of the bridge. Adding more crazy color like purple would have totally overloaded the build, and I still wanted to highlight the roof. So I could also have used maybe some greens, but it probably would not have detached itself nearly as well against the blue sky. For the rest of the lighthouse, I once more prioritized colors and textures over details. As it is only 5 blocks wide anyway, I could not have done it otherwise even if I wanted to. So the strategy here is simply to continue the wooden gradient. However, I wanted the main body of the lighthouse to be a few tones lighter, like it was coated in a different material like clay. This allowed me to go really light at the top, like it was reflecting a lot of light, and I think this really emphasized its role as a beacon of hope for sailors. Also, very interesting, I altered the shape of the roofs here, going more for a gothic, pointy style rather than the more curvy and bulky roof I put on the house. As I think the lighthouse could double down as a bell tower to alert the villagers in case of danger on the horizon. Since I don't have the space for a well-defined bell, and well, you wouldn't see it from the ground anyway, I used the roofs and shape to call on our collective imagination, and I did fill in the rest of the blanks. Let me know if it works. I am really curious to see what you thought when you saw it for the first time. At this point, the building process was drawing to an end, as all that was left to do was to replace the blocking for the observation decks and the roofs, while adding the lights and the bells. I chose to go with fire to light the place up. They obviously had no electricity, although maybe it could be interesting to supplement it with a magic system drawing its power from the ocean or something. This might be an interesting idea to develop down the line. For the bell, I still wanted to try to make it noticeable from the ground, so I chose to go big. Its size will also help it being heard throughout the island. Well, you could not really see it, so in a last-ditch effort I thinned out the wall so they will give more space to the bell. The final step was to replace my roof blocking with the same kind of orange roofs as I had used below. I was really weirded out at first because I had been seeing it with a dark roof for hours at this point, and it took me a while to get accustomed to the new look. It's why I prefer working with a blocking as close as possible to the final color, but at the end of the day it did not really matter because the final look is what's really important. And oh boy is it awesome! The cliffs are so impressive yet pretty and welcoming. The lighthouse, due to its shape, feels very tall without overpowering the rest of the place. The bridge connecting it to the main island feels incredibly dodgy, which gives it a lot of character, like if the lighthouse is an incredibly important piece of infrastructure, but keeping the access secured is really challenging due to the external factors of the oceans, the monsters. One of my favorite parts are the really steep stairs that give this beautiful view of the skeletons at the corner, but also the stairs are really narrow and barely fitted on the cliff, which gives it this very realistic feel that reminds me of the steep cliffs on the seaside. The interior is minimalistic but has all the accommodations needed for a couple of lighthouse keepers to live a good life. A few shelves, a roaring fire pit ready for tonight's meal, a bedroom with a comfy double bed, a few decorations, a dresser, and a beautiful view of the ocean. I can hear seagulls in the distance just looking at it. The view of the calm ocean really is something else. I cannot wait to trouble it slightly by adding a few not so cutesy creatures looming on the horizon. Eventually I'm going to have a bit of a dock area on that cliff and a building making the connection between the lighthouse and the skeleton path. I cannot wait to play with angles and line of sights in the village and dock area to give the most rewarding visual discoveries. Just seeing a peek of the lighthouse, peek at the skeletons, some glimpse of some monsters on the horizon is going to be absolutely awesome. You can already see a peek of what I mean on this screenshot where the lighthouse appears between the ribs. And it's on this reveal that I'm going to say goodbye. I hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you very soon for some other areas of this project. Bye!